Okay. It's on, yeah. Can I start?
You can start in 30 seconds.
Okay. Good evening and welcome to the Lay Center. First of all, I'd like to welcome Cardinal Michael Czerny. Thank you for accepting this invitation to conclude our online autumn series, Nurturing Resilience. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Donna Orsuto, and I'm the director of the Lay Center. Today, joining us are a few members of our Lay Center community. Other members and staff are following this session online nearby, thus enabling us to respect social distancing guidelines. We at the Lay Center want to express a warm welcome to all of you who are joining us online from various parts of the world. We're delighted that you could be with us today. I'd like to begin this session with a short prayer. Actually, it's the prayer, part of the prayer that concludes Fratelli Tutti. Come, Holy Spirit, show us your beauty, reflected in all the peoples of the earth, so that we may discover anew that all are important and all are necessary, different faces of the one humanity that God so loves. Amen. Following Pope Francis's lead, we need to ask the question, how are we to prepare for the future? How are we to get ready for the post-COVID world? From a Christian perspective, resilience is not merely a personal effort to bounce back after a tragic situation. Resilience is best understood in the context of the virtue of fortitude, a gift from God that gives us courage and strength and enables us to overcome fear. In our online series of short reflections that you can now find on our website, we have looked at this theme from different perspectives. I'd like to publicly express my gratitude to all of the contributors to this series: Archbishop Jan Ernest, Dr. Mariana Lowry, Dr. Catherine Stevenson, and Dr. Felipe Dominguez. Today, we conclude the series with the topic, All in the Same Boat, Nurturing Resilience in a Global Community, using Fratelli Tutti as a point of departure. Cardinal Czerny has graciously offered to lead us in this reflection. Cardinal Czerny, a Jesuit from Czechoslovakia and Canada, is currently Undersecretary of the Migrants and Refugees section of the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development. He served as a Special Secretary for the Synod of Bishops on the Amazon in 2019, and he's a member of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples. For decades, he's been involved in the promotion of social justice, especially in Latin America and Africa. Today, Cardinal Czerny will show us how, in the context of the relationship between memory, forgiveness, reconciliation, and peace, resilience is necessary to overcome our divisions without losing our identity. We'll begin by hearing his opening remarks, and then he will respond to 5 questions that have been prepared by young scholars and professionals here at the Lay Center. Cardinal Czerny.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome. So dear members and friends of the Lay Center, today's title comes from Pope Francis's Urbi et Orbi addresses on Friday, 27th of March, and Easter Sunday, the 6th of April. We are all in the same boat. While the theme, Nurturing Resilience in a Global Community, is the Lay Center's first semester series on resilience. 4 previous thinkers have made important contributions to the topic, as does the 7th chapter of Fratelli Tutti, Paths of Renewed Encounter. Fratelli Tutti is a great act of faith. As Sister Marianne said on the 30th of October, we learn that in spite of the present crisis, humans will rebound, that the multiple systems we are part of must promote and strengthen the psychosocial factors that in turn will promote resilience, and that, in particular, our expressions of faith, tradition, celebration, and a sense of community play an essential role. In grad school in the 1970s, we were taught to problematize, which at first glance doesn't seem to be a good thing, since problems tend to be obstacles and what you want is to resolve them and move on. But recognizing that things are often not simply as they seem, to problematize is to consider something obvious, unproblematic, to discover that it's not so easy or as resolved as one might like to think. It's to question something that is taken for granted and not questioned at all. To problematize is to dig beneath the surface, to root around in the basement with the hope of finding out what's really going on. The purpose is to get into a better position to propose a more promising approach, a really probable solution. So when I was assigned resilience, I noticed it was a word we didn't use when I was in grad school, but it has come in as something good and admirable. I found out it's the ability of a substance to return to its usual shape after being bent, stretched, or pressured. When applied to people, resilience tends to suggest that outcomes or results have turned out more positive than expected. Simply put, resilience is bounce back. But this idea bounced against something Pope Francis has been saying in this time of COVID. We cannot go back to old ways after the pandemic. Anyone who thinks that the only lesson to be learned was the need to improve what we were already doing is denying reality. While puzzling about resilience, or bounding back, I learned another new idea, precariat. The word comes from combining precarious with proletariat. Precariat combines a huge population and its conditions. Intermittent employment or underemployment or just hanging out waiting for work are ever more widespread. According to a 2020 Oxfam report, only 1 in 6 countries spends enough on health, only 1/3 of the global workforce has adequate social protection, and in more than 100 countries, at least 1 in 3 workers has no labor protection. The growing absence of decent and secure work results in many precarious existences, insecure and unpredictable existences. In brief, objectively and subjectively miserable. Putting the two together, I began to wonder if what the precariat needs is resilience. They don't want to bounce back or rebound. They want to move on to decent work and the life that goes with it, as Catholic social thought teaches, for example, in Laborem Exercens. So with COVID-19, we can take the term precariat in a broader way to mean everyone on earth. All lives are more precarious now. This is the same boat we're all in. The entire human family is a precariat, occupying the habitable landmass surrounded by oceans. One and only one lifeboat. Life in this boat is precarious because instead of behaving like fratelli tutti, humans assault each other and assault our natural environment too. In Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis does a great job of problematizing this penchant for assault, which has brought us to real crisis, both exacerbated and revealed by the global pandemic. But what the Holy Father advocates is not a resilient return to previous states of affairs. Rather, we need to move decisively towards something new. To illustrate this thought, let's reduce the size of the image. Imagine a lifeboat for 10 people with 10 oars. 10 of us have filled it to capacity. We are rowing towards land. We cannot go back to our previous state when we and many others were on a large vessel because it has sunk. Presently, we come upon another survivor in the water. What to do? Do we squeeze in an 11th person and jeopardize a boat designed for 10? We take the risk of dialogue, and someone has an unusual idea. Let's take turns. Each of us can swim for a few minutes, one after the other. The boat will never overcrowd, and all 11 have a good chance of surviving. Here, resilience does not mean nostalgia for the larger vessel, nor does it mean violently defending the current apparent security. It means going forward in a new way of achieving survival and more. Such are the paths forward that Pope Francis lays out in Fratelli Tutti. On the 13th of November, Felipe Dominguez reminded us of an essential virtue for moving forward. As a Christian, he said, I cannot help associating resilience with intergenerational solidarity. St. John Paul II's famous definition of solidarity is applicable to the relationship between young and old. Solidarity is a firm and persevering determination to commit oneself to the common good, that is to say, to the good of all and of each individual, because we are all really responsible for all. After advocating dialogue for negotiating our crises in Chapter 6 of Fratelli Tutti, Chapter 7, the one we're looking at today, would have us set out, in the words of its title, on paths of renewed encounter, by acknowledging and indeed working through our accumulated hurts, wounds, injuries, and impasses. For the wounds to heal, we must boldly start from the truth, from the recognition of historical truth, which is an inseparable companion of justice and mercy, and which is indispensable for the path towards forgiving and restoring peace. These paths entail the exercise of penitential memory, one that can accept the past in order not to cloud the future. The current challenges reach back to the dawn of our moral consciousness, as Dr. Catherine Stevenson said on the 6th of November. Bad things and bad things are happening. It does not mean we failed or that God failed us. Our scriptures begin with the story of the expulsion from paradise. This story tells us that the world is now broken and that all life will experience suffering. Our faith tradition lets us know that life will be more of a series of crises to be negotiated. Only the truth of facts is a solid enough basis for mutual understanding, commitment to the common good, and openness to new solutions. And this connects with the need for memory. Forgiving does not mean forgetting. Conflict is inevitable, but this does not mean that violence is acceptable. Starting processes of reconciliation requires time and patience, respect for victims' memories, renouncing violent claims, and working through the conflicts. Memory also inspires us because much has been achieved and learned. As Archbishop Ian Ernest noted on the 23rd of October, history provides this reassurance. The courage and the great sense of creativity of our ancestors have helped in facing the odds of life and in overcoming fear and despair. Progress and development were brought about because they were focused on what was essential. They created the opportunities to make the world a better place to live. My time is almost up. So here is a mere reminder of paths of renewed encounter that Pope Francis traces in chapter 7. There's the art and architecture of peace, which begins with the least. There's promoting forgiveness in the face of inevitable and legitimate conflicts, and reconciliation is the best way to move on. Finally, renouncing war and renouncing capital punishment. In conclusion, the last three words of chapter 7 are an enduring appeal, an enduring appeal. To my mind, they sum up the ethical and spiritual thrust of the whole encyclical. Fratelli Tutti is an urgent appeal for social friendship and fraternity. It must necessarily keep on appealing as long as humans prefer division and enmity over harmony and friendship. And only God knows how much time or how little time we have left. In chapter 7, the paths of fraternity, friendship, harmony, and hope are laid out. So the next and final question of the encyclical is, who is to step up? The 8th chapter answers the question with its title, Religions at the Service of Fraternity in Our World. Religions are the ones we expect to step up first. From chapter 8, then, let me take this quote to conclude. From our faith experience and from the wisdom accumulated over centuries, but also from lessons learned from our many weaknesses and failures, we, the believers of the different religions, know that our witness to God benefits our societies and helps us recognize one another as traveling companions, truly brothers and sisters. So now, in our one same boat, let's talk and let's row. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cardinal Czerny, for that vivid image of the lifeboat and for the image of encouraging us to think creatively of how we can go forward in a new way of achieving not only survival, but so much more. Thank you also for sharing with us and helping us to assimilate these paths of renewed encounter that the Pope brings out in Fratelli Tutti. Now we'd like to open it up for questions that have been prepared in advance. And I'll invite each person to introduce themselves briefly, to ask their question, and then I'll invite you to answer. Thank you.
Good evening. I am Olena Shust from Ukraine, and Your Eminence, I would like to ask you, what does fraternity mean in the situation of asymmetrical social conflicts, particularly for the weaker party of the conflict, like the Russian-Ukrainian war? What should the weaker party do in the light of fraternity and social friendship?
So thank you for your question, a difficult one for you and really for all of us. Fratelli Tutti seems to put us in a, as you say, in a difficult or asymmetrical situation. But in fact, Fratelli Tutti is not a document for negotiation. It's not a negotiating position. It is a method, a path, a way of responding to difficult situations. So one response to your question, which applies to many different situations, I'm not applying it to anyone in particular, is to ask oneself, what does Fratelli Tutti say to both parties in what you call an asymmetrical social conflict? And that's something to meditate on and to work on together. That is to say, those who can read Fratelli Tutti on both sides of a conflict. Reading Fratelli Tutti on both sides of a conflict, which has been started or which has developed for a whole series of reasons, a whole series of factors, and which from an economic, social, a cultural, a historical, a geopolitical, resource points of view can be analyzed and understood, and and also needs to be worked on from all those different ways. So I would, in a sense, translate your question in the following way. Praying and meditating and suffering a situation of asymmetrical conflict, and most such conflicts are asymmetrical, what does Fratelli Tutti invite each one to do on each side of the conflict? And there it's maybe in the discussion you yourself would have some suggestion, some contribution to make, that as in the lifeboat experience, the lifeboat example, what could dialogue possibly reveal? What new way forward could dialogue uncover? What discovery could dialogue possibly make? And that's the risk and the hope of openness which Fratelli Tutti invites us to.
Thank you for that response, which is also very challenging. You know, it's challenging for everyone to think, you know, how can both parties read and move beyond? It's very, very difficult. But thank you for that. And now we'll move to the second question.
Thank you, Your Eminence. My name is Isaias Marcano, and I'm from Mozambique. My question is, so the expression Fratelli Tutti indicated that to proclaim the gospel, there's no need for proselytism. To impose Christianity doctrine to others. Fratelli Tutti means that in the all human beings, there is the logos or the semina verbs, which means God is present in all cultures and religions in the many different ways. So how can we recognize and live this kind of fraternity in the globalized world?
So thank you for your question, and your question puts us in a quite a different terrain or territory than the first one. Here we have the question of our living our faith in relation to other faiths. You begin by saying there is no need for proselytism, and we could say that we didn't need to wait for Fratelli Tutti to affirm that. I think we recognize that proselytism by itself is not justified and is counterproductive. Where I think the invitation is, so the invitation is obviously not, as you say, to impose doctrines on anyone. In fact, we should not even be imposing doctrines on each other. It's not a question of imposing. Doctrine is meant to illuminate our faith. It's not meant to be to define people in ways that are either correct or incorrect, or acceptable or unacceptable, or valid or invalid. So there's a kind of maybe the problem is actually in the proselytism, and let us set that aside. What does Fratelli Tutti mean? Fratelli Tutti means that we will behave like brothers and sisters to the extent that we live our faith fully and authentically. That we live our faith fully and authentically. And the invitation is to help one another to live our faith that way. If you are in vis-a-vis someone with a different faith, what can you do to help him or her live their faith fully and authentically? And hopefully they will do the same for you. And so that's the invitation of Fratelli Tutti. We will, and that's specifically the invitation of or that is spelled out in chapter 8, in the last chapter, where, amazingly enough, the encyclical, after presenting us all these challenges and all these opportunities, says to the religions, all religions, including ours, okay, so now let's get on with it. Don't sit now back and say, okay, now who's going to start and who's going to pick up this challenge? You're the first to challenge. You're the first to step up. So if you're a Christian, you're most welcome. And if you belong to another religion, you're most welcome. And if you believe in something which is not called religion, you're also most welcome. And anyone who says, well, it's not for me, it's for someone else, has not understood the encyclical. I think that's the meaning of the fraternity from a religious point of view.
I'm reminded of a phrase of Francis de Sales, who said, be who you are and be that well. And just this idea that each person has a responsibility, and that no one is excluded, that we all are responsible, and from whatever religious background or no background, we must move on. So let's move on to our third question, which will be given here.
Good evening. My name's Joseph Tulloch, and I'm from England, from the UK. So in section 258, the Pope says, quote, "It is very difficult nowadays to invoke the rational criteria elaborated in earlier centuries to speak of the possibility of a just war, never again war." End quote. He does say earlier in the same paragraph that church teaching allows for self-defense by means of military force. But my question is, it's very understandable given the way that just war theory can be and has been used in the past to justify illegitimate wars, that the Pope would be skeptical of it. And I think there are also concerns about whether it's with modern military technology, it's even possible to have proportional war, because that's a really important part of just war theory. So I can understand the skepticism, but it seems quite extreme to say that to deny the possibility of justified non-defensive war entirely, because you can imagine cases where one country is clearly the aggressor and invades another country. And so my question is, does Fratelli Tutti really say that it could never be justified to intervene in such circumstances? And yeah.
Yeah, I think it's, thank you for the question, and it's one that I think was picked up by the media. It's one of the first things that the media also noticed when Fratelli Tutti was published. One of the things that I think this reflection invites us to do is I would say, try it out on ourselves. I think it would be helpful to understand what the encyclical says if one got in touch with one's own use of just war theory. How do you justify your acts of aggression? How do you say, well, how do you convince yourself that a value, a good, a benefit is worth the violence that you are contemplating or in fact carrying out? I think that's very important too, because otherwise just war theory, I think, is misunderstood and misused as a justification, and it is invoked to as a shield, as a disguise for motives which are far from just and far from justifiable. And that's, I think, in other words, my feeling is that what Fratelli Tutti is doing is setting aside the possibility to use just war theory for sort of rhetorical purposes, for the rhetorical, the communicational, the ideological repainting of aggression and violence in terms that are justifiable. And I won't go into concrete examples because that would not be appropriate, but I think we can think of, I think we should begin by thinking of personal examples, and then we can perhaps apply them to historical examples as well, always recognizing that we need to give people the benefit of the doubt and not accuse them. The other point I think that I think is very important is that I have the impression that we haven't fully grasped the terror that we are now capable of. In other words, that this notion that war can be proportionate to some good, it has been outstripped by our own sort of technological and military industrial capacity to produce weapons of ever greater sophistication and ever greater horror. So there and this argument, you can find this argument in Fratelli Tutti, that the that the mechanics of war or the hardware of war is itself now an argument against any possible justification. And thirdly, it's very important in unmasking our abuse of, or our temptation to abuse just war theory. I think it's very important always to make a very penetrating and sober economic analysis of warfare, because increasingly there are economic interests at work, and to such an extent that we are not even talking about the same thing when we talk about a just war, because what we're actually talking about is the business of war, the war business. And that has, with its investments and with its profits. And so I don't think the Holy Father uses the economic argument, but I find it persuasive that you don't have to scratch very much beneath the surface to see that here we have a business going on that is highly profitable. So my takeaway on the question of just war would be, again, two things. One is try to see how we use it ourselves, and secondly, analyze with clear-sightedness the interests that are involved and the objective disproportion between our capacity to destroy and any possible value that we could be allegedly defending.
Okay, thank you very much for that response. Again, another difficult question for you. So now we'll move to the fourth.
Thank you very much for your presence. I'm Elena from France, and I would like two interconnected questions. So the first is that it seems on encyclical that we hear much more voice of Pope Francis. There are much more quotes of his own speeches than of Episcopal Conference, for example, and I would like to ask you why, and if it is the case. And then also, we got the impression that Pope Francis uses his voice to criticize Western culture, especially when it comes to the throwaway treasure. And so I would like to ask you, how the encyclical was received in Western cultures. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. I think it's, I find it helpful to understand, to locate Fratelli Tutti now in the magisterium of Pope Francis. So this is the third of, I think, a important series, Evangelii Gaudium, which is the renewal of the Church's own capacity, preparedness, ability to bring the good news to the world. Laudato Si, which is bringing that good news to the world itself, that is to say, what is needed so that we can have or maintain or recover our common home. And now Fratelli Tutti, which is how do we need to be in order to do the first two, in order to bring the good news to the world and in order to save and promote our common home. So my feeling is that the Fratelli Tutti is in a certain sense, going back over the ground which the previous two encyclicals already have gone over. And so the quotations from the other episcopal conferences have already been made. And now it's a question of going deeper. It's not, in that sense, it's not new, it's not breaking open whole new areas. It's like strengthening or deepening the very foundations of what the teaching has already been. So the Episcopal conferences and many other documents which he also mentions in the introduction are already there. As for the criticism of culture, I would ask back why you call this culture Western. I don't see much that's Western in it. It's famous for being global. I think you know better as well as I that the promoters and the beneficiaries of this culture have no fixed address, not because they're homeless, but because they're floating in the wherever in the globe it's convenient, and in fact it doesn't have to have a physical address to be a part of the promotion of global or globalized culture. So I don't think it's particularly Western, because the culture is not particularly Western or Eastern or Southern. It's global, and its effect is felt globally in a way that I don't think is can be connected anymore with a particular region or even a particular history. The throwaway mentality, the consumerist mentality, the use and abuse of brothers and sisters from a utilitarian and a hedonistic point of view, this unfortunately is widespread. It's everywhere, and it affects the poor and the less well off, no matter where they are, and it takes hold everywhere without any real discrimination. I think it's probably too early to ask how Fratelli Tutti is being received here or there or in particular places. It's, as you all know, because you've made the effort, it's not a quick or easy read. And in any case, it's not meant really for reading. It's meant for meditation, for self-examination, and above all, for dialogue. And I think that that's possible wherever we are and is necessary wherever we are. And so I think that the question that we all want to ask is whatever places or cultures, and there's quite a few represented even here in the room and much more amongst all those who are listening and watching, is how can the question, the reflection, the meditation, the self-examination, and especially the dialogue take place wherever our cultures are, wherever people can ask the questions and do the listening, which could lead to a greater fraternity and social friendship. And so what I hope is the answer, the real answer to your question is yes, everywhere. Yes, everywhere. That there's no limit to where Fratelli Tutti can be read, and there's no limit, there's no geographical or cultural barrier for it to be picked up and lived anywhere. And I think one of the things which I hope a intercultural center like yours could do in the future is, in fact, to collect examples of how Fratelli Tutti has come to life in many different places. I think that would be that could be a very beautiful way of responding and of stimulating response to the encyclical. So I'm hopeful that we will soon be, maybe we already are, soon be collecting signs of Fratelli Tutti everywhere. I can say for myself that in trying to help work on it, that I've had chances to dialogue with people whom I never expected to dialogue with, and that I give the credit to Fratelli Tutti for that.
Thank you for that response to Elena's question. You know, as you were speaking, I was thinking of even the dynamics of the spiritual exercises of Saint Ignatius, and how this document has a very Jesuit dimension to it, if I could say that, Ignatian dimension, in that it encourages us to go deeper, you know, to not just read it, just like you can't read the spiritual exercises, you can't really read a document like this, but it leads us to self-examination, but also transformation, to real change, that we can be different than the way we are right now, and that this can happen through genuine dialogue with one another. And I think certainly here at the Lay Center, we're learning that day by day, and thank you for your suggestion, which I think we will definitely follow up on. We're going to go to our final question, and then we will have a few minutes, if any of you would like to follow up, we'll have a few minutes that will be possible before we close. So our final question. You might want to stand up for that. Yes, if you don't mind. Thank you.
We mostly speak of structures that have been historically designed and built by men, which is not necessarily wrong. It means that partial and incomplete, probably. So when we speak of new structures in the light of the Fratelli Tutti with a global approach, what does it mean for women, and can we reshape these social structures?
Certainly the answer is yes to whatever the question was. Certainly the answer is yes. No, one I think correct, if you like, response to Fratelli Tutti is to encourage us to ask questions, and to ask questions and to listen to questions and to respond to questions in real dialogue. And this goes back in some ways to what I said earlier about just war theory, is that it's helpful for us to appreciate the invitation, the gospel call of Fratelli Tutti to reflect, now this is Jesuit, to examine how we ourselves use just war theory. And so if you don't do that, then, well, you're just in some ways just playing with concepts, and they can go back and forth, and so they do. And I think the question that you asked is similar, that we can discuss what has happened historically and what is happening sociologically or culturally or economically in regard to the role of women in the church and also in other contexts. But what Fratelli Tutti is inviting us to is not to set up polarizations which then distribute the gains and losses or the wins and the failures according to categories, opposing categories, but to listen and then to listen some more. And so if your question is the question of can we believe in listening, in dialogue, in encounter, also with regard to the now in many ways, charged question of women, the answer is we can and we must. We can and we must. And if we take the risk of dialogue and of real questioning, we will certainly also find our breakthroughs. And if we don't, we'll just continue the debates and the standoffs, of which we could give too many examples. So I think the invitation to everyone is to listen under the heading of your question, and to seek, because now we're not just talking about the exchange of ideas, but we're talking about how we are living our faith, how we are living our humanity, and how we are hoping to find hope. Hoping to find hope. And in this menaced common home of ours, as I suggested, with the clock ticking, there isn't if you look at the glaciers, for example, there is not a huge amount of time. We seem to be running out of time. And there are many other indicators, the fires, the terrible storms. Then it really behooves us to undertake listening very radically and very deeply and very constantly. And then we are invited, I think, to join Pope Francis in the three, if you like, the three dimensions that are symbolized by the three documents, Evangelii Gaudium, Laudato Si, and Fratelli Tutti. And that we are invited, because we're now raising this question as Christians, we're invited to re-deepen our listening in terms of an evangelizing church, a missionary church, church sent to the peripheries. That's one. We are invited to do the same listening and encountering and discovering what to do in terms of our common home. And we're invited to discover how we can be truly be what we are and become what we need to be as brothers and sisters. And that's the great mystery and the great joy of Fratelli Tutti, that it is, the title itself is both our reality and our vocation. It's the truth which we need to live, and it's also what we need to do. And I think that's very encouraging, but very challenging. And when you raise the question, as you do, about women, I think both men and women are challenged, and I hope we will meet the challenge.
Okay. Thank you very much for that answer as well. I think we'll continue that discussion also perhaps later in the evening. But just to conclude for right now our session, if there's anyone who would like to briefly ask a question, okay, Isaias, if you would stand up to do that, I think people will hear you better and take off your mask. Thank you. Yeah. Isaias Marcano.
Yes, again, Isaias Marcano. So my question is also your conclusion, where you said religions are the first to step up. So my question is, how can we implement or live this dimension while we know there are some places where religions are also involved in some other conflicts also, like even I can say, for example, my country also, we are in small conflicts also. How can we live this situation? Thank you.
So I know you are from Mozambique, so I have some idea of the terrible conflicts that are there. And so I feel that when it comes to conflicts, such as the different ones that have been mentioned, I think that there's a double, maybe a double message from Fratelli Tutti. On the one hand, not to accept the polarization, the conflict, but to dedicate oneself to listening. I think that besides whatever one must do to live or to survive or to defend oneself, not to give up on listening. And I think that's the old cliche is that the first victim of a war is the truth. But maybe what we now know is that the first victim of war is listening. We stop listening. We allow ourselves to be used as factors in a conflict that others have designed and are carrying forward and are profiting from, and we are just playing our part, the part that they want us to play. So I think the first thing is listening, and the second is, and this is maybe another form of listening, but it's the word is maybe clearer, is resist. I think one of the things that we discover when we set aside the illusions that have been been created by ideas like the just war theory is, I say that not the theory itself, but ideas, the use of it rhetorically, what is our calling to resist? And there we need to be clear-sighted and see that we need to resist not only the so-called enemy, but also the ways in which we're being used by our side. And that's what I think is probably the case in these what are very complex sometimes, or I shouldn't say complex, unclear conflicts. I think the conflicts that we have heard about this evening are that way, that they bring together a whole series of factors that we are not even accustomed to thinking about when we think of in the simple language of war and peace and of two sides. And so I think I would suggest that there's this double vocation, double mission that we are given by Fratelli Tutti, and really by the whole teaching, the whole social teaching of the Church, but which I would sum up as listening and resisting, and putting those together, and not imagining that one does it alone, but with others. I think that's a way forward, with the hope, as in the example I gave of the lifeboat, that we will come up with solutions that we wouldn't have thought of before, but which allow us to reach safety and not just reach safety, which is the same as what we had before, but reach a better place. Because the 11 who arrive, having done what the idea suggests, will be better people than if the 10 had only saved their own lives.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Cardinal Czerny, for taking the time to be with us today and for stimulating this conversation and for encouraging us all to spend a lot of time with Fratelli Tutti and to let it transform us in our walk together. I'd like to also thank the members of the representatives of the Lay Center community who participated in person and everyone involved in organizing this meeting. We're planning other online events for 2021, and I'd encourage you to look at our website, laycenter.org. And once again, the entire series on resilience is available on our website, and this video will also be available on our Facebook page. Please read and please share these with your friends. In conclusion, I'd like to just quote from Pope Francis, just a little quote that is at the back of a beautiful book that has a preface by Cardinal Czerny, Life After the Pandemic. It's an appropriate way to close, I think. Pope Francis says, "If we act as one people, even in the face of other epidemics that threaten us, we can make a real impact. May we find within us the necessary antibodies of justice, charity, and solidarity. We must not be afraid to live the alternative, the civilization of love. In this time of tribulation and mourning, I hope that where you are, you will be able to experience Jesus, who comes to meet you, greets you, and says, "Rejoice." And may this greeting mobilize us to invoke and amplify the good news of the kingdom of God. Thank you all for being with us this evening.
I can edit it off.